The curse of James Dean's car. I never believed in curses, not in the slightest. I've always been a man of reason, a mechanic with grease under my nails and a wrench in hand. But the day *@ came into my shop, I felt something shift in the air. Something cold, something dark. It wasn't like any other job. And deep down, I knew it the moment I saw that twisted heap of metal being pulled off the flatbed. The Porsche 550 Spyder, James Dean's car, sat before me, mangled and nearly unrecognizable. But there was no mistaking the silver shell of little bastard. I had heard the stories, of course. Who hadn't? James Dean, the young Hollywood star, died behind the wheel of this very car in 1955. And ever since, whispers of a curse surrounded it. They said everyone who came into contact with it met a gruesome fate, but I didn't care. It was just a car, just metal and rubber. And yet, as I stood there staring at it, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was staring back at me. "Mike, you sure about this?" my apprentice Tyler asked, his voice uncertain. He was young, fresh out of trade school, and not yet jaded like the rest of us in the business. He had heard the stories too, and I could see the fear in his eyes. "Of course," I replied, forcing confidence into my voice. "It's just a car, nothing more." But as I approached, I noticed something odd. The garage, usually filled with the sounds of clanging tools, the hum of engines, and the chatter of the radio, had gone eerily silent. Even the air felt thick, oppressive. I dismissed it. Just nerves, I told myself. I walked over to the Porsche, my fingers brushing against the cold metal of its hood. Immediately a chill shot through me, but I ignored it. I had a job to do, and I wasn't about to let some silly ghost story get in the way. That night I stayed late. The shop was quiet, deserted except for me and little bastard *. I worked on it for hours, getting lost in the mechanics, in the puzzle of putting it back together. But every so often I'd catch something out of the corner of my eye, a shadow, a flicker of movement. Each time I looked up, nothing was there, just the empty shop. Then came the noises, soft at first, barely noticeable, like a faint tapping on the windows. I brushed it off as the wind. But the tapping grew louder, more insistent, until it became a pounding, like fists slamming against the glass. My heart raced as I wiped my hands on a rag and walked over to the windows. Nothing. No one. I turned back to the Porsche, feeling a sudden wave of unease. And then out of nowhere, the radio came to life, blaring static and distorted voices. I stumbled back, startled, knocking over a toolbox in the process. The sound echoed through the garage and I stood there, frozen, staring at the car as the radio hissed and crackled. My eyes were drawn to the driver's seat, to the place where James Dean had once sat. For a split second I saw something. Someone sitting there. A figure, pale and gaunt, its eyes hollow and fixed on me. I blinked and it was gone. I wasn't alone in the shop anymore. The radio cut out, plunging the garage back into silence. I tried to steady my breathing, to calm the racing thoughts in my head. It was late. I was tired, and my mind was playing tricks on me. That's all it was. But deep down I knew better. Something wasn't right with that car. Something was watching me, lurking just beyond the veil of reason. I decided to call it a night, but as I turned to leave, the door wouldn't budge. I tugged harder, but it was as if something on the other side was holding it shut. Panic clawed at my chest. I grabbed my phone, but the screen was dead. No signal, no battery. The lights above me flickered, casting long, shifting shadows across the walls. Then I heard it, a soft, raspy whisper. My name. I spun around, but there was no one there. Just the Porsche, sitting in the middle of the shop, gleaming under the flickering lights. The whisper came again, louder this time, echoing through the garage. My heart pounded in my chest as I backed away, every instinct screaming at me to run, to get as far away from that cursed car as possible. But as I turned to make a break for the back exit, something stopped me dead in my tracks. Tyler's body. He was hanging from the rafters, his eyes wide open, his face twisted in a grotesque mask of terror. Blood dripped from his mouth, pooling on the concrete floor beneath him. His body swung gently back and forth, casting long, dark shadows across the shop. I let out a strangled cry, stumbling back as bile rose in my throat. How? When? He had gone home hours ago. The whispering grew louder, more frantic, filling the air with a chorus of disembodied voices. They were everywhere, all around me, closing in. And then in the midst of the chaos, I heard it, a low, guttural laugh. It came from the car, from little bastard *. The lights went out, plunging the shop into darkness, and in that darkness, I saw it. Two glowing red eyes staring at me from the driver's seat. I woke up on the cold concrete floor of the shop, my head pounding and my vision blurred. It was still dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of the streetlights outside filtering through the windows. My heart was racing, my mind struggling to make sense of what had happened. I scrambled to my feet, looking around frantically. Tyler's body was gone. For a moment, I thought it might have been a nightmare, a twisted hallucination brought on by stress and exhaustion. But when I looked at the spot where he had been hanging, the dark stain of blood was still there, glistening in the dim light. No, it wasn't a dream. Tyler had been here dead, and now he wasn't. I grabbed my phone, and this time the screen flickered to life. 3:17 a.m. I tried calling Tyler, hoping against hope that he would answer, that I would hear his voice on the other end and everything would make sense again. But the call went straight to voicemail. Panic surged through me. I had to get out of here, had to get away from that car. I wasn't about to wait around for whatever had taken Tyler to come for me next. My hands trembled as I reached for my keys, but as I did, something caught my eye. The Porsche. It was different. No longer a mangled wreck, it looked almost pristine, as if someone had worked on it overnight, repairing the damage. The twisted metal had been smoothed out, the paint gleamed under the flickering lights, and the tires looked brand new. It was impossible. I hadn't done any of that work. I hadn't even touched the car yet. My breath hitched in my throat as I stared at it. There was no logical explanation for what I was seeing, and yet there it was, sitting there as if taunting me. The whispers started again, soft at first, barely audible, but they grew louder with each passing second, until they filled the shop with an eerie chorus of voices. I backed away, my eyes locked on the car, and that's when I saw it. A figure sitting in the driver's seat. Not the gaunt, hollow-eyed figure from before, but someone else. Someone I recognized. Tyler. He was staring straight ahead, his hands gripping the steering wheel, his face pale and lifeless. Blood dripped from his nose, pooling in his lap. His eyes were wide open, unblinking, fixed on something I couldn't see. I called out his name, but he didn't respond. He just sat there, motionless, as if he was part of the car now, fused to it. I took a step closer, my hand reaching out, and that's when Tyler's head snapped toward me, his dead eyes locking onto mine. "Mike," he rasped, his voice barely more than a whisper. "Help me." I froze, every muscle in my body screaming at me to run, but I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, as Tyler's mouth twisted into a grotesque smile, blood oozing from between his teeth. "Get in," he said, his voice dripping with malice. "Let's go for a ride." I shook my head, backing away, but my feet felt like lead. The air in the shop grew colder, my breath visible in the freezing air. Tyler's eyes followed my every move, his smile widening as I inched toward the exit. The door was only a few feet away. If I could just make it outside, maybe this nightmare would end. Maybe I could escape whatever had taken hold of Tyler, whatever had cursed that car. But as I reached for the door handle, it wouldn't budge. It was stuck just like before. I tugged harder, but it was no use. The door wouldn't open. I turned around, my back pressed against the cold metal. And that's when I saw it. Little bastard was moving, slowly, almost imperceptibly. The car began to roll forward, inching toward me as if it had a mind of its own. Tyler was still in the driver's seat, his hands gripping the wheel, his eyes fixed on me. The engine roared to life, filling the shop with a deafening noise that drowned out the whispers. The headlights flickered on, bathing me in a harsh, blinding light. I was trapped. The car sped up, rolling faster and faster, and in a split second, I knew it was coming straight for me. I dove to the side just as the Porsche slammed into the door with a sickening crunch, the metal buckling under the impact. The force of the crash sent me sprawling across the floor, my head spinning. For a moment, everything was silent. The car had come to a stop, its front end buried in the door, the engine still rumbling. I pushed myself up on my hands and knees, gasping for breath. And that's when I heard it, a low, guttural growl coming from the car. I looked up, and there, standing next to the Porsche, was something *inhuman*. It was tall, its body twisted and grotesque, its skin pale and slick with blood. Its eyes glowed with a sickly yellow light, and its mouth was stretched into a wide, toothless grin. It looked down at me, tilting its head to the side as if studying me, and then it let out a low, rumbling laugh. I scrambled back, desperate to put as much distance between myself and that thing as possible, but it moved faster than I could react. In an instant, it was on top of me, its bony fingers wrapping around my throat, squeezing the air from my lungs. Its face was inches from mine, its eyes burning into me, and I could feel the heat of its breath on my skin. The stench of rot filled my nostrils, and I gagged, struggling to break free, but its grip was too strong. I could feel the life draining out of me, my vision fading, and just when I thought it was over, the creature leaned in close, its lips brushing against my ear. "Your next asterisk," it whispered, its voice like nails on a chalkboard. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone. The pressure on my throat vanished, and I gasped for air, coughing and sputtering as I clawed at the ground. When I looked up, the car was back where it had been, the shop silent once more. Tyler was gone, the figure, the whispers. Everything had vanished, leaving me alone in the dim light of the garage. But I knew the truth. I wasn't alone. And whatever it wasn't done with me yet. Days passed, but the terror of that night clung to me like a dark cloud. The shop was quiet, too quiet, and every creak, every draft of wind seemed to carry an ominous weight. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. The police had come after I reported Tyler's disappearance, but they found nothing. No body, no signs of a struggle. To them, Tyler had simply vanished. But I knew better. I couldn't stay away from the shop. I couldn't stay away from little bastard asterisk. I tried, but something kept pulling me back, as if the car had sunk its hooks into me, dragging me deeper into its cursed orbit. It was a curse, after all. I believe that now. How could I not? The next time I returned, the Porsche was sitting in the center of the garage, gleaming as if it had just rolled off the assembly line. There were no dents, no scratches, no signs of the horrific crash it had been through. It was perfect, almost too perfect, as if someone or something had restored it overnight. The whispers started again, low and insistent, just beneath the surface of my thoughts. They called to me, beckoning me closer, and despite everything, I found myself drawn to the car. My hands trembled as I reached out, my fingers brushing against the smooth, cold metal of the hood. The moment I touched it, a jolt of electricity shot through me, sending shivers down my spine. Mike! The voice was soft, barely more than a whisper, but I recognized it immediately. Tyler. I spun around, but the shop was empty. The shadows loomed large in the corners, but there was no one there. Mike! The voice came again, closer this time, right behind me. I turned back to the Porsche, and there, reflected in the gleaming surface of the car's hood, I saw Tyler's face. His eyes were hollow, his skin pale and bloodless, and his mouth twisted into that same grotesque smile. He was trapped inside the reflection, staring at me with a look of desperation and malice. "You have to help me," he said, his voice echoing inside my head. "You have to finish it." "Finish what?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "What do you want from me?" The reflection shimmered, and for a moment, I saw something else. An image of James Dean, his face twisted in agony, his eyes wide with terror as he sat behind the wheel of little bastard asterisk. Flames licked at the edges of the reflection, and I could hear the sound of screeching tires, the sickening crunch of metal, and the screams. So many screams. "Finish the car!" Tyler's voice urged, growing more insistent. "Finish the job, or it will never let you go." I staggered back, shaking my head. "No, I can't! I won't!" But the whispers wouldn't stop. They filled the garage, echoing off the walls, growing louder and louder until I could barely hear my own thoughts. The car seemed to pulse with energy, like a living thing, feeding off my fear. I could feel it pulling me in, wrapping its invisible tendrils around me, tightening its grip. I had to get out. I had to leave before it consumed me, before I ended up like Tyler, or worse. But as I turned to run, the garage door slammed shut with a deafening bang. The lights flickered and went out, plunging me into darkness. My heart pounded in my chest as I fumbled for my phone, but the screen remained black, unresponsive. I wasn't alone in the darkness. The sound of footsteps echoed through the garage. Heavy, deliberate footsteps that sent a wave of terror through me. I backed away, my hands shaking as I tried to find the light switch, but the footsteps grew closer, faster, and then I saw it. A shadowy figure emerged from the darkness, its form barely discernible in the faint light from the street lamps outside. It moved with unnatural speed, closing the distance between us in an instant. My back hit the wall and I had nowhere to go. The figure loomed over me, its eyes glowing with a sickly yellow light, its breath hot and rancid against my skin. It reached out, its fingers long and skeletal, and before I could react, it grabbed my wrist, pulling me toward the car. I struggled, kicking and clawing, but its grip was like iron. I was dragged across the concrete floor closer and closer to the Porsche. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, as the figure forced me into the driver's seat, strapping me in with a seatbelt that seemed to tighten on its own, constricting around my chest like a vice. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The figure leaned in close, its face inches from mine, and I could see it now. Its skin was cracked and peeling, its eyes sunken and hollow, and its mouth was filled with rows of sharp, broken teeth. It smiled, a twisted, malevolent grin, and whispered in a voice that sent shivers down my spine. "You're next." The car roared to life, the engine revving on its own, and the headlights flickered on, illuminating the dark garage. The figure stepped back, disappearing into the shadows as the car lurched forward. I struggled against the seatbelt, but it was no use. The car was in control now. The garage door flew open with a screech of metal, and the Porsche shot out into the night, speeding down the empty streets with reckless abandon. The city lights blurred past me, the world outside a distorted mess of colors and shapes. The steering wheel twisted in my hands, but I wasn't the one driving. Something else had taken control. The car raced through intersections, barely missing oncoming traffic, and I could feel the adrenaline surging through me as the speedometer climbed higher and higher. The engine roared louder, and the whispers in my head grew more frantic, more desperate. Finish it, Tyler's voice echoed inside my skull. Finish the car or it will never stop. But I didn't know what he meant. How could I finish something that had already been completed? The car was perfect, restored to its former glory. What more could it want from me? As the Porsche careened through the streets, I caught glimpses of things in the corners of my vision. Twisted, shadowy figures lurking in the alleyways, watching me with glowing eyes. The world outside seemed to warp and twist, bending to the will of the car as it tore through the city like a predator hunting its prey. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the car came to a screeching halt. We were in front of a small, run-down house on the outskirts of town. The engine cut off, and the whispers stopped, leaving me in a deafening silence. My hands trembled as I fumbled with the seatbelt, finally managing to free myself. I stumbled out of the car, gasping for breath, my heart pounding in my chest. The house loomed before me, dark and foreboding, its windows shattered and its paint peeling. Something about it felt familiar, like I had seen it before, but I couldn't place where. I knew I had to go inside. The car had brought me here for a reason, and I wasn't leaving until I found out what that reason was. The front door creaked open as I approached, and a gust of cold air hit me, carrying with it the scent of decay. I stepped inside, my footsteps echoing through the empty halls. The house was silent, but I could feel the presence of something watching me, lurking just out of sight. I made my way through the darkened rooms, my breath visible in the freezing air. The walls were covered in strange symbols, drawn in what looked like dried blood. My stomach churned as I passed by old, tattered furniture, the fabric stained with something dark and sticky. And then I found it, a room at the end of the hall, its door slightly ajar. Inside, there was a single object, a large, rusted metal chest. My heart raced as I approached it, my hands trembling as I reached for the latch. I opened the chest. Inside was something I could never have expected. The chest was filled with dozens of photographs. Old, weathered photos, each one depicting a gruesome scene. Accidents, bodies mangled beyond recognition, faces frozen in terror, twisted in pain. And in every single photo there was the car. Asterisk little bastard asterisk was always there, lurking in the background, gleaming like a specter of death. I pulled one of the photographs out, my hands shaking. The photo was yellowed with age, but the image was clear. James Dean, moments before the crash, sitting behind the wheel, staring into the camera. His expression was a mix of fear and resignation, as if he knew what was about to happen but was powerless to stop it. My stomach churned as I rifled through the rest of the photos. They all told the same story. People who had crossed paths with asterisk little bastard asterisk and met the same grisly fate. Each photo was like a death sentence, capturing the moment right before the curse took hold, right before the inevitable crash. And then I found the last photo. It was different. It wasn't old, wasn't faded or yellowed. It was fresh, newly printed, the colors sharp and vivid. And when I saw it, my blood ran cold. It was a picture of me, standing in the shop, right in front of asterisk little bastard asterisk. My expression was one of fear. My eyes wide, my mouth slightly open as if I had been caught mid-breath. I recognized the moment immediately. It was the night Tyler had disappeared. The night the car had first begun to reveal its true nature. But in the photo, something was different. Behind me, in the shadows, was the same dark figure that had attacked me. Its yellow eyes gleamed in the background, its twisted grin staring out at me from the photograph, as if mocking me. I dropped the photo, my heart pounding in my chest. The house felt like it was closing in around me, the walls pressing tighter, the air growing colder. I had to get out of there. I had to leave before whatever had cursed that car found me again. But as I turned to run, the door to the room slammed shut on its own. The lights flickered, casting long shadows across the walls. And then I heard it, the low rumbling growl that I had heard in the garage. It was coming from inside the house now, from somewhere deep within the walls. The whispers returned, louder this time, more frantic. They filled my head, drowning out my thoughts, urging me to do something I couldn't comprehend. I backed away from the chest, my eyes darting around the room, searching for a way out, but there was none. The walls seemed to pulse with energy, as if the house itself was alive, feeding off my fear. And then the figure appeared again, standing in the doorway. It was clearer now, more solid, its eyes burning with a sickly yellow light. It stepped forward, its bony fingers outstretched, reaching for me. "You can't escape," it hissed, its voice echoing inside my skull. "You're part of this now. You've always been part of this." I stumbled back, tripping over the edge of the chest, falling to the ground. The figure loomed over me, its grin widening as it leaned in closer, its breath hot and foul against my skin. "Finish the car," it whispered, its voice like nails on a chalkboard. "Finish it, or join us." Suddenly the room seemed to shift, the walls bending and warping, the floor falling away beneath me. I was no longer in the house. I was back in the garage, standing in front of the Porsche. The car gleamed under the flickering lights, perfect and untouched. as if nothing had ever happened. But I wasn't alone. Tyler was there, standing next to the car. His body broken and twisted, his eyes hollow and lifeless. And next to him was James Dean, his face pale and gaunt, his eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and rage. "Finish it," they both said in unison, their voices merging into one. "Finish the car or you'll never leave." I looked down at my hands, and in them, I held a wrench. My mind raced, my heart pounded in my chest. I didn't understand what they wanted from me. The car was already finished, restored to perfection. What more could I possibly do? But as I stood there, the whispers grew louder, more insistent, and I realized what they meant. It wasn't about fixing the car. It was about ending the curse, breaking the cycle, and there was only one way to do that. I stepped forward, wrench in hand, and raised it high above my head. The car seemed to shudder, the headlights flickering as if in protest. But I didn't stop. With all the strength I had left, I brought the wrench down onto the hood of the Porsche, smashing the gleaming metal with a loud crash. The car roared in response, the engine revving to life on its own. But I didn't stop. I swung the wrench again and again, each blow sending shockwaves through the garage, each hit chipping away at the cursed metal, until finally, the car fell silent. The whispers stopped. The air grew still. I dropped the wrench, breathing heavily, my hands shaking. The car was a wreck now. Its once perfect exterior dented and broken, its spirit shattered. And then, just as suddenly as it had all begun, it was over. The figure was gone. Tyler and James Dean were gone. The garage was silent, the curse lifted. But as I turned to leave, something caught my eye. A glint of metal on the floor where the Porsche had been. I walked over, bending down to pick it up. And when I saw what it was, my heart nearly stopped. It was a key. A small silver key engraved with a single word. Bastard. I stared at it for what felt like an eternity. My mind racing, my heart pounding in my chest. And in that moment, I realized the truth. The curse wasn't broken. It had just passed on. To me, I was the new owner of Little Bastard Asterisk. And now, it would follow me wherever I went. The car may have been destroyed, but its spirit lived on, buried deep inside that key. And I knew without a doubt that it would find a way to return. Because curses, they never really die. The end.